Mazzy here. This is the experimental music tag created by Alex, and he has a channel I'll link below, Motoric 247. And Alex is into avant-garde, minimal, drone, out there jazz, amazing taste, and an exploration in music that you probably, most of you, don't know about or don't follow as much, but you check them out. And I thought this was really interesting because I touched the surface, and I can answer all these questions, although some of them I'm probably on the more commercial side. I'm definitely on the more commercial side, showcasing some of the answers of these questions, but I found it really interesting. There are 8 questions, and I'm going to kind of jump into them in my way. And in a couple of the questions, my answers will have multiple answers, multiple expressions, displays of records, because I love to showcase this kind of music, and I don't get a chance to very often. So, Alex, thanks for starting this. Link below to his channel, and the questions are in the description. So look in the description sometimes. You guys don't do that very often, do you? Avant-garde. That's why we're in kind of this artsy black and white stuff. I mean, black and white doesn't necessarily mean avant-garde, but you know, I had to go there. So the first question is show an improvised music. Show an album with improvised music. So there's so many jazz albums I can show, and some music, some albums that are in the avant-garde, and even rock and roll to some extent, but I decided to go with Organic Music by Don Cherry. Don Cherry's jazz musician who worked with Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane, a lot of musicians, and he was not quite as out there initially like Coltrane and Ornette as well, but in the early 70s, he relocated to Stockholm, Sweden, and did a series of recordings. And this is a result of that, recorded in the early 70s, 71, 72, with what would be known as organic music, way before the old organic label that we see today on foods and you know, FDA approved organic. Improvisation for the most part. A lot of the music originally composed in terms of plotted out by Don Cherry with these other various musicians. This is a cool record. It is somewhat out there, and it's a beautiful kind of psychedelic cover. Love this cover. This is a reissue. I don't know if this actually, I think these recordings were not issued at the time, as I recall. Someone may correct me on that. But improvised, Don Cherry, more in the out there vein, but really interesting recordings. Somewhat lo-fi, but really interesting just the same. Second question, show a record showing a Moog synthesizer. Now, let me just show this to begin with, just because. Now, this is probably the most commercial example, and this is the record that rock and roll fans of my generation really got into with the Moog synthesizer, and that is Switched on Bach on Columbia Records. And this was originally recorded by Walter Carlos, performing on the Moog synthesizer. Walter later would transition and become Wendy Carlos, and this was a mega seller. This introduced classical folks. Classical folks were probably somewhat perturbed by this bastardization of classical music, but Bach music played on the synthesizer opened it up to a whole new world and a whole new generation. Now, again, I think the earliest rock and roll record was the Monkees' headquarters. I think it was Mickey Dolenz who got one of the first Moog synthesizers. George Harrison also acquired one early on, and that could be heard on Abbey Road, and he did electronic sounds on Zapple Records, an offshoot of Apple Records. But this was a game changer in so many ways. Commercial as hell, but a beautiful record. And let me show a few other things too. In terms of the classical realm of the use of the Moog synthesizer, one of the most beautiful records that I have is by Tomita, and this is Snowflakes Are Dancing. And this is Debussy done on the Moog synthesizer. This is such a lovely record, a gorgeous record, and ethereal record. RCA Classics, this is from around 73, I believe, 1974. I remember playing this in my early record store days in the store and taking this home. It's a gorgeous record. I always thought that looked like Spock, Mr. Spock, Leonard Nimoy. But of course, it's there's Tomita there. Fantastic record. I can't really talk about the Moog synthesizer without talking about Beaver and Krause. Paul Beaver and Bernie Krause made 3 records. These are the 2 of the 3 records they did together as Beaver and Krause on Warner Brothers Records. Now, the 3rd one I'll show answering a later question, but they were working for Moog, selling the Moog synthesizer. They were the West Coast representatives for the Moog synthesizer and was trying to sell the Moogs to studios and early adopters in the late 1960s, 67. And they actually had a booth at the Monterey Jazz Festival showcasing the Moog synthesizer. I think that might be where Mickey Dolenz saw it or saw the first presentation. Of course, then they went and would do demonstrations to studios. But they did a series of avant-garde, ethereal Moog synthesizer experimental records with All Good Men Here and Godiva. Beautiful covers, really interesting records. Bernie Krause would later help George Harrison work at Friar Park on the Moog, and George Harrison infamously took the tape of that demo and put it on one side of the record, initially crediting Bernie and then crossing it out. So there was a little turmoil there in that experience. But part of this is great because it's recorded at Grace Cathedral on Nob Hill in San Francisco, and it's a gorgeous record. And Paul Beaver would turn up on records by Bernie Krause and Art Garfunkel, and other rock musicians play on their albums. Jerry Garcia, the whole Bay Area community of the Airplane and the Dead and the like. But these are really interesting records on Warner Brothers, and I just really like that. I do want to continue in this vein with this question with another musician who I personally have known for over 30 years because he has a brand new record now. He was doing ARP synthesizers, which was more the electronic computer-generated thing on a smaller scale, and was somewhat of an early adopter in San Francisco, and he owned different fur recording studios, and that is Patrick Gleason, or Dr. Patrick Gleason, the professor, because he had a doctorate. And his brand new album that just came out that I got a copy of is this one here. It's called Forever, F-O-U-R, Forever by Patrick Gleason, all synthesizer music. Again, not on the, it's on the AARP, not the Moog, but he was an early adopter, and he is the professor musician that really got Herbie Hancock into the Moog, into AARP, into electronic music on this album, Sextant, and Gleason is on here, and it says Dr. Patrick Gleason, ARP synthesizers 2600 and soloists, and he really got and sort of in a way taught and set up the early synthesizers for Herbie Hancock, who would later, as we know, go on to do Rocket and Headhunters and all that great fusion of funk and soul and jazz music. But this is a beautiful out there for the time, I think, record that's really wonderful. Fantastic cover and a beautiful, beautiful record. Patrick Gleason also did the synthesizer work, a lot of it with, I think, Paul Beaver on the soundtrack for and the sound recordings for the Coppola film Apocalypse Now and many other artists. But I just wanted to show this because this is a cool new record that he just put out. So it's a very low press run, so check it out. Pat Gleason, so I had to show that. Okay, the next question, to show a record with field recorded sound. And that brings me to this 3rd album, In a While, Sanctuary by Beaver and Krause on Warner Brothers Records as well. And what's interesting about this is it has environmental improvisations recorded with the Moog synthesizer, Hammond organs, congas, tablas, tambourines, drums, etc., and including live recordings of the sea voices, lions, birds, monkeys, cable cars, tow cable car clicks, the San Francisco Muni buses. Beaver and Krause went around San Francisco for several weeks. They spent a month recording in San Francisco with a portable stereo tape recorder the sounds of streams, birds, people, animals at the zoo, and machinery. Some added blues organ guitar stirred well and called it Walking Green Algae Blues. So this is a wonderful sort of field collaboration with the Moog synthesizer and field recordings, again on Warner Brothers Records, Beaver and Krause. Paul Beaver, or Bernie Krause, I shouldn't get them confused. Bernie Krause did a series of recordings. There used to be a chain store based in Berkeley, and they had a chain called the Nature Company in the 1980s through the 90s that had a lot of nature, environmental kumbaya, tchotchkes, and globes and sound devices. And he put a series of CDs out of the rainforest CDs and sounds that he collaborated and recorded in Brazil in the rainforest, and also, again, field recordings that he mixed with the Moog synthesizer. So those are something to check out. I don't have any of those, but I remember hearing those quite a bit when my photographers used to shoot the Nature Company catalog. All right, show a record with drone sounds. Now, this is something I've shown before, a series of records, and it really interests me. And this is by an English artist named Leyland James Kirby. He goes under the name Caretaker. These are 3 of 6 records he's done, collaborations with this painter, Ivan Seal. Ivan Seal painted these lovely covers. And he takes old ballroom recordings and slows them down and does different layers, and they're very drone-like, they're very ambient, they're very minimal. They're very beautiful and sometimes very jarring. And the series of these was meant to be the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So they go from the early stages to the later stages, and these were released over a different period of time, emulating the progression of having that disease. And it's sort of a gradual deterioration of memory loss. And these are beautiful records, not for everyone, but really interesting. I felt for how I perceive this drone thing. Now, obviously, there's a lot of more drone music that I'm not aware of or party to or know about, but these are what I wanted to include. Caretaker records, beautiful records. Not for everyone. A lot of this music, what's interesting about this music, again, probably the ones that are showing are on the more commercial side somewhat, in some cases, that what Alex showed and what other people are going to show on this. Okay, show a record with spoken word. Again, I have a lot of records. I kept thinking about Ken Nordine, who did a series of albums of word jazz in the late 50s, which I'm a huge fan of. I've done showcases of him on my channel, but I want to show this album. I love this record. This is on Nonsuch Records, called Landfill. This is a collaboration with Laurie Anderson and the Kronos Quartet, obviously the Kronos Quartet out of the Bay Area. Laurie Anderson, I got into her, most of my friends got into her in 1981, 82 with the independent single, Oh Superman, which is a very drone-like, repetitive song, which I think is brilliant. I think it charted in the UK, but of course it didn't chart in America. But Warner Brothers signed her and did that first album, Big Science. And this is really great because this is about the storms and flooding, the ones on the East Coast. Which storm was it? So many storms now, right, the last few years. But she writes this, Laurie Anderson does the vocal, the voice, manipulated in some extent. Some of it is very unmanipulated with this beautiful score that Kronos plays. But I love this record, and they performed it live. I wish I'd seen them. I've seen Kronos, God, 20 times over the years, and they're a group, they want to say 20th century, now 21st century modernist quartet, string quartet out of the Bay Area that's collaborated with everyone from Lou Reed to Laurie Anderson to John Cage to Steve Reich to a lot of these composers have composed special pieces that Kronos has performed. If you ever get a chance to see them, it's really wonderful. And it just depends on what you get each performance. But Landfall is sort of a double record here about that period of storm. This is produced by Kronos Quartet and Laurie Anderson. Fantastic record. Show a record with a processed instrument and voice, and I'm sticking with Laurie Anderson again because she is a favorite of mine. Again, she's probably more on the commercial side for this story, but not really out there. But this record, this is a 4-record live set of her piece, United States of America, United States. She's included several parts of this on other records, and this is the full-on recording performance she did live. This is a great, great set on Warner Brothers if you ever get a chance to pick it up. I've seen her maybe 6-7 times over the years, and performance art at its finest, projection. She's the one that started creating this violin, and the bow included audio tape ran across a head mounted to her violin, a tape head where she had these loops, and really wonderful, wonderful recordings. So United States of America, Laurie Anderson, and that's for the spoken word question. Now, the next one is interesting because I don't have any albums by Nurse with Wound. Nurse with Wound is a sort of a collective put together by one British musician, Stephen Stapleton, and he started this project in 1978-79 and has done a series of collective records with different artists' influences, very out there, minimal, atonal noise performances. Again, I don't own any, but there's this project called the Nurse with Wound list. And this next question is, show a record from an artist on the Nurse with Wound list. I'll put a link below to that list. It's on Wikipedia. And these are artists that have influenced Nurse with Wounds and or they worked with over the years, on the early years of these records. Now, again, mine are probably more on the commercial side somewhat. And these aren't all of it, but I decided just to pick a stack of records of artists that they cite as very influential or they've collaborated with. And of course, you can't do it without talking about John Cage. And I could have included John Cage on the synthesizer, the Moog synthesizer. This is John Cage Variations 2 on Columbia Records. I have probably 4 or 5 John Cage records. Same with Terry Riley. I think he's on the list too, but I didn't pull any Terry Riley for this, Columbia Records. The Residents out of the Bay Area, obviously relocated from Louisiana, and this is their first album, 1,000 copies pressed. This is my original copy, still in shrink, very rare. Avant-garde, in a way, they were a performance group with films and projected films and avant-garde and costumes and electronic music and out there edgy performance pieces. They're the ones that would later wear the giant eyeballs on their head. I think they originally got a cease and desist, although there's has been a reissue of this. So originally I bought it for the cover, but I have seen them, and they're pretty an amazing art project there. Throbbing Gristle, I remember getting into them because of the name. I did see their last show ever before they reformed years later in San Francisco at Keys Art Pavilion. And in San Francisco, 20 Jazz Funk Greats is not that. This album does not have 20 jazz funk greats. Out there noise, avant-garde records, that's just one of them. They also cite Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. I just decided to pull one. Burnt Weenie Sandwich, because I never show this record. And you can understand why Nurse with Wound would be influenced by all these artists, as well as the Zappa produced, I think he produced this, didn't he? Trout Mask Replica. This is the record that everyone wants in their collection, but only half the people, if that, actually like this record. But Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band, the record that everyone, if they don't like it, they try to like it. They want to think they like it, and very few people like it. I put it on maybe once a year just to remind myself what it's about. And there's some of it, it makes me smile. I don't love it all, but it makes me smile. I think it's really interesting. It's a real ballsy record. And of course, I'm going to end this segment with, they cite Yoko Ono and the Plastic Ono Band. And of course, I got to include some sort of Beatle connection. They include John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band record. The first Yoko album, Plastic Ono Band record, Ornette Coleman actually plays on one track on this record. And this is an out there improvised record. It could have been in that category too, but it's really somewhat out there. And Yoko definitely comes from the Fluxus movement, that art scene in the early 60s, mid 60s, that was experimental performance art, conceptual art, which I'm a huge fan of. I've said that many times. And of course, the album Fly by Yoko Ono, which is somewhat out there, but is such a fantastic record from my point of view. Well, all her records are really interesting. When she gets more commercial and sings, some people think she shouldn't sing normally. She should just do the more out there stuff. But the first couple albums, especially that first one with Klaus Voormann on bass, John Lennon on guitar, and Ringo Starr on drums, they really push it. And it's a really cool record. Not for everyone, but really interesting record. And lastly, the final question is, show a record featuring a toy instrument. What I should have showed, and I realized I don't even have it anymore, oh my gosh, is when Tom Waits did the album Swordfish Trombones. I need to remedy that. Tom Waits is one of these great artists. In that record, he really started shifting and doing this sort of junkyard orchestra, as it's kind of coined, has become known as, kind of out there stuff more than his piano ballads like Old 55 and his first albums on Asylum Records. And that record really changed things for him. And all the records after that, he always does interesting junkyard saws and metal pieces of things and toys. And so I just thought I'd show this. This is Orphans. This is Brawlers, Ballers, and Bastards, somewhat outtakes and other avant-garde, to a point, some very commercial, some covers. Really a cool, wonderful folio collection. These have been issued as 3 separate vinyl collections, which I do not have, but I thought I'd end up with this, and there's some toy instruments on this. And, you know, we know that so many, everything from the Beatles using a kazoo in Lovely Rita Meter made on Sgt. Pepper. I had to include that Beatle thing in there, but and many others beyond that. So I think this is a cool thread. I'll list the questions below. Please subscribe and check out Alex's channel, and it's fun stuff, and it's fun to show different music from my collection once in a while. So thanks for watching, and Mazzy loves you.